Okay, take two. Today's shiur is dedicated by Rabbi Daniel Mamon. B'schus, the Rambam, Maimonides, he's a direct descendant of the Rambam. And in honor of the Rambam that we're going to learn today is Zechuso Yagen Aleinu. The Rambam says in the 9th parak of Hilchos Malachim Halacha Aleph that Adam HaRishon was netztava on how many mitzvahs?
1.
First he was commanded, don't eat the fruit. Good. And then the Gemara says he was commanded actually on 7. He was given all Zayin mitzvahs b'nei Noach. It was all alluded to in the conversation Hashem had with Adam. Then comes Avraham Avinu, and he was given an added mitzvah. He was given the mitzvah of Milah. What else did Avraham Avinu add? He davened Shachris. Comes Yitzchak. Yitzchak was Mafresh Maser, and he added Tfilas Mincha. Okay? So according to the Rambam, Avraham added Milah and Shachris. Yitzchak added Maser and Mincha. From where do we learn that Yitzchak added Maser? Like the pasuk says in this week's Parsha, Parsha's Toldos, Vayizra Yitzchak ba'aretz hahi, vayimtza b'shana hahi, mea she'arim, vayivarchehu Hashem. Yitzchak, not only did he find mea she'arim, he also was masaking the mitzvah of Maser.
Avram gave Maser to Malki.
Oh, very good, very good. Good, we're going to come to that. Okay, so it says that Yitzchak planted in that year, and he found on that year 100 times fold. And Chazal say that Yitzchak, how did he know he found 100 times fold? He estimated it, he made an estimation, lamasrais, for Maser. He estimated how much he produced for Maser. So the Rambam says, who invented Maser? Yitzchak Avinu. Comes the Raavad, as Shakespeare said, whenever there's a Rambam, the Raavad is not far behind. Okay? Comes the Raavad, and the Raavad asks, this is the kasha that Rabasi asked, what do you mean Yitzchak invented Maser? But we already learned that Avraham was Mafresh Meiser. Like it says, Umalki Tzedek Melech Shalem, Hevi loy lechem vayayin, v'hu choyhein le'el elyayin. And Avraham Avinu, vayiten loy Maser Mikael. He gave him Maser from all of the spoils of war. So that's the kasha, the Raavad. Yeah, you hear the kasha, the Raavad? Dani, are you feeling, a little defensive that the Raavad attacked the Rambam?
It's a good question.
It's a good question. You concede that it's a good question. That why did the Rambam say that Yitzchak invented Maser? What about the fact that Avraham invented Meiser? Avraham was the first to give Meiser. The Kesef Mishnah explains the kasha of the Raavad, because it says in Parshas Lech Lecha, Vayiten loy Maser Mikoil. So Avraham was Masakin Maser, not Yitzchak. Sarachian on the Rambam. Good kasha? So the Kesef Mishnah, who's Rabbi Yosef Karo, Maran Bet Yosef, comes to the defense of Maimonides. He says like this: when Avram gave Malki Tzedek Maser, it wasn't Midin Maser. He didn't give him 10% of all of his possessions. He only gave him 10% of the spoils of war. So we don't see that Avram was Masakein Meiser. Avram Avinu was Kaved Be'oid, Ba'mikneh, Ba'kesav Azav. He didn't give him 10% of all of his possessions. He only gave him 10% of what he took as spoils of war. Yitzchak made a chayk kavua to give 10% of your possessions. That's the answer. Okay? So now, you feel more relief now with that defense of the Rambam? Yeah. So by the way, the Tzafnas Panech, the rugged shavar, also gives a similar answer, that not that Avraham Avinu only gave from the spoils of war. Avraham Avinu, one time he gave Meiser. One time he gave Meiser, but he never established it that this is a regular practice, and Yitzchak came along and he established it as a regular practice. So we have so far two defenses for the Rambam. Number one, Avram only gave it from the spoils of war, not from all his possessions, or Avram Avinu did not establish it as a regular practice. Comes the Radvaz. The Radvaz was a Rebbe of the Arizal, Rav David ben Zimra, and he defends the Rambam. He says that Avram Avinu, in fact, was Masakein Maser. He was Masakein Maser Ksofim. He was Masakein Maser on money that you make, because he gave from the spoils of war. But Yitzchak was Masakein Maser of Gidulei Karka, like it says, Vayizra Yitzchak ba'aretz hahi, like Rashi explains. So the Rambam says, Yitzchak was Masakein Maser, Maser meaning Maser Dagon. Avraham was Masakein Maser Ksafim, and Yitzchak was Masakein Maser Dagon. Okay, that's another approach. The only thing is, the lashon of the Rambam is Yitzchak was Masakein Maser. He doesn't say Maser Dagon as opposed to Maser Ksafim. Why then wouldn't the Rambam say Avraham was Masakein Maser of money and Yitzchak was Masakein Maser of grain? So in the Sefer Chavatzel's Hasharon, he quotes a Chassam Sofer and Simon Reish Lamed Beis. Is Maser on money the Iraisa or the Rabbanan? Giving 10% of your earnings, is it biblical? Is it rabbinic? Or there's even a third opinion, it's a custom. So which one is it? It's a machlekes. There are opinions that it's d'oraisa, there are opinions that it's rabbanan, and there are opinions that it's only a custom. If you say Meiser Ksafim is not d'oraisa, then we understand why the Rambam did not list it. Namely, Avraham was Masakein Meiser Ksafim, but it's not biblical. It's only d'Rabbanan. When Yitzchak was Masakein Maser Dagon, that's Midoraisa. Meaning, the answer of the Radvaz that Avraham was Masakein Meiser Ksafim and Yitzchak was Masakein Meiser Dagon, but you could still ask, why wouldn't the Rambam write Avraham was Masakein Meiser Ksafim? The answer is because Meiser Ksafim is only d'Rabbanan and Meiser Dagon is d'Oraisa. That's why he only listed the takana of Yitzchak. So, there are a few questions over here. According to the opinion that Meiser Ksafim is d'Oraisa, why didn't the Rambam say Avraham was Masakein Meiser on Ksafim? Furthermore, is what Yitzchak gave Meiser Dagon, or is what Yitzchak gave Meiser Ksafim? If you look in Perkei Rabbi Elazar, Perek Lamed Gimel, Yitzchak, the Perkei Rabbi Elazar says the Meiser that Yitzchak gave was money to Aniyim. So in that case, when the Rambam says Yitzchak was Masakein money, Meiser, he was talking about Meiser Ksafim. But it's not true. Avraham was Masakein Meiser Ksafim. So we're sort of up the creek. Why didn't the Rambam mention Avraham's giving of Meiser and only that of Yitzchak? So the Chavatzel Hasharon has a very interesting chakira. And that is, what's the din of Meiser Ksafim? Is it a din that I have to give tzedakah? And the shiur of tzedakah is 10% of whatever my earnings are. It doesn't have to be from those earnings. I could take it from somewhere else. I could take it from elsewhere. I just have to make sure at the end of the day that the amount of charity that I put in the pushka in the course of the year amounts to 10% of my earnings. In other words, it's a mitzvah of tzedakah, and the shiur that the Torah suggests that I give is that ultimately it ends up to be 10% of my earnings. Or is it's actual Meiser like Meiser Dagon, namely that whatever money I made this year, it's like the money is tevel, and from this money there is a Meiser over here, and I have to take it out and give it to the poor. In other words, is there a holiest din Meiser, like Meiser Dagon, that in the money that I made in 2025, if I made $10,000, then in that $10,000 there's $1,000 that's Meiser, and I have to take that $1,000 and give it to charity? Or is it that I have an obligation to give charity this year, the amount being that it should tally up to 10% of my earnings? You see the difference? In other words, is there a chalois din meiser, like Meiser Dagon, or is it that it's just a halacha and tzedakah? I should give tzedakah, it should tally up to be 10% of my earnings. If you remember when we were learning Masechta Ksubais on Daf Nun, where it's we learned that in Usha there are Masakein Hamavazbeis Al Yavazbeis Yoiser Mechaimesh. Don't give more than a fifth. Like it says Aser to Aser, 2 Meisers. And the Shita Mekuvetza says that you don't just take 20%, you take 10%, and then you take another hafrash of 10%. That's the idea of chaimesh, of a fifth. You take 10%, and then you take another 10%. We know that many poskim say, let's say I say, you know what, I'm not going to be so exacting. I'll just give 15%. Some poskim say, the Knesset Agdol writes, that if you should not just say, I'll just give, let's say I make $100,000 a year, say, okay, here's $13,000 for tzedakah. No, if you want to give more, you take exactly $10,000, you give it to tzedakah, and then whatever you add is added tzedakah. But you, so to speak, are careful to give bidiyuk, maaser, and then whatever is added is, so to speak, a separate cheshbon. There is such an idea that when you're giving maaser ksafim, it's good to give a precise amount, not more and not less, and then whatever you want to give more is, so to speak, like a separate calculation. The Chida writes that from here we learn that the din of maaser ksafim is learnt out from maaser dagan. And therefore there should be a precise calculation of 10%, and then whatever is in excess is very nice, and it's a very great mitzvah, but it's, so to speak, a separate cheshbon. Bottom line is, it seems that the din of maaser ksafim, it's not a halach and tzedakah, that you should just give charity, and then, by the way, it should amount to ultimately 10% of my earnings, but it's like maaser dagan, where in my total earnings, there is a 10% obligation that I have to execute that amount. Anyway, the Chavetz Hasharon says that it could be that when Avraham Avinu gave maaser to Avimelech, to Melchizedek, he was giving maaser in the first understanding. He was just giving tzedakah. It happened to tally up to 10% of his total earnings. But Yitzchak came along and he enacted that there's a din of maaser ksafim similar to maaser dagan, that in the total amount that a person has is latent in it an obligation to execute giving 10% of it, and that was the, so to speak, the chiddush of Yitzchak. So Yitzchak, of course, Avraham gave maaser, but what Yitzchak added is this sort of understanding of maaser, that there's a holiest din maaser, that in the total earnings that you have, there is a certain amount that has to be removed. The same way, if you have a field and it produces X amount in a certain year, you have to give, let's say, 10% of your corn, or you have to give 10% of your grain. And you can't say, well, let's say like this. Let's say your field produces 100 pounds of wheat. You can't say, well, I have to give the Levi 10 pounds of wheat, so I'll go to Gourmet Glatt, buy 10 pounds of wheat, and give it to Dr. Menachem Fuchs or to Gordon. Not sure which one I'll give it to, whichever one, it will be a big competition, which Levi I give it to. Yeah? He lives closer, I don't know. But in any event, let's say like this. Let's say I produce 100 pounds of wheat, so I have to give the Levium 10 pounds. Could I go to the store, buy 10 pounds of wheat to give it to Levi? No, it has to be from the wheat that my fields produce. So Yitzchak was mechadesh. It's the same thing with maaser ksafim. In the money that you make, that money itself has in it 10% that has to be delivered. Okay, that's what I just wanted to share with you from Parshas Toldos, and then we'll do a few halachas in Hilchos Tzitzis.